Continuing with the C# tutorial, we're going to go over methods. What is a method? A method is a group of statements that perform a particular task. In addition to the C# built-in methods, you may also define your own. Methods have many advantages, including reusable code, it's easy to test, modifications to a method do not affect the calling program, and one method can accept many different inputs. Every valid C# program has at least one method, the main method. Every C# program starts with the method main. Declaring methods. To use a method, you need to declare the method and then call it. Each method declaration includes the return type, the method name, and an optional list of parameters. As you see below, the return type first, then the name of your method, and in parentheses type 1, parameter 1, type 2, parameter 2, and so on and so forth. And then in the body of the method, which is enclosed in curly braces, you'll have your list of statements that will execute when this method is called. For example, the following method has an int parameter and returns the number squared. So we start off with int, and the name that we're giving this particular method is sqr, short for square. And in the parentheses, we have one single parameter, int x. In the body of this method, enclosed in curly braces, we have two statements. Int result equals x times x, and return result. The return type of a method is declared before its name. In the example above, the return type is int, which indicates that the method returns an integer value. When a method returns a value, it must include a return statement. Methods that return a value are often used in assignment statements. Occasionally, a method performs the desired operations without returning a value. Such methods have a return type called void. In this case, the method cannot be called as part of an assignment statement. Void is a basic data type that defines a valueless state. If you do not want your method to return a value, you should use the return type void. Calling methods. Parameters are optional. That is, you can have a method with no parameters. As an example, let's define a method that does not return a value and just prints a line of text to the screen. Static void say hi, and in parentheses we have no parameters, so they're empty, and in the body of this method we have console.writeLine, and in parentheses and double quotes the string hello. Our method entitled say hi returns void and has no parameters. To execute a method, you simply call the method by using the name and any required arguments in a statement. So here we're going to show both the method and the method call. First, the method, static void say hi. And in the body of say hi method, we have console.writeLine hello. Next, we are going to execute the say hi method inside of the main method. So the main method is static void main string args, and in the body of this main method, we call our previous method, say hi. So the name say hi, and there's nothing in the parentheses because there's nothing in the parentheses when we created the say hi method above. So we have no arguments in the parentheses below, and that's going to output the string hello. The static keyword will be discussed later, and it is used to make methods accessible in the main method. Fill in the blanks to declare a method that does not return a value, which means it's going to be void, and displays welcome to the screen. So we're using the keyword static because we want to be able to call this method inside the main method of our C# program. And since it does not return a value, we're going to give it the data type void. And the name that we're giving it is greet. We have no parameters inside of the parentheses. And inside the body of this greet method, we have the statement console.writeLine welcome. Now you have your opening curly brace, so you have to enclose this with a closing curly brace, like that. Calling methods. You can call the same method multiple times. So let's show you how that works. First, we have a say hi method again, static void say hi, console.writeLine hello. And then inside of our main method, static void main string args, inside of the body of the main method, we call say hi 3 times. Say hi, say hi, say hi. And what that's going to output is hello on its own line. Hello, the next line, hello, the next line, hello. Drag and drop from the options below to declare a valid method and call it in main. Now, since we want to call it in main, we want to use the keyword static. So if we look down here at the bottom, we find static. We pull it up there. Since this method has no return statement, it's not returning a value, we want to use the void keyword. So after static, we're using void. And this particular method has the name of func, short for function. It has 0 parameters, so there's nothing in the parentheses. And in the body of the method, which is enclosed in the curly braces, we have a single line of code that says console.write test. Now inside of the main method, we're going to call that function. So here we have static void main string args, and in the body of this main method, we're going to call func. So let's drag func up here. And because the func method had no parameters in the parentheses, when we call the func method down here, we have no arguments. So again, another set of empty parentheses. All right, so we went through the introduction to methods. Let's look at method parameters. Method declarations can define a list of parameters to work with. Parameters are variables that accept the values passed into the method when called. For example, in this particular method, we have void print, and in parentheses, we have one parameter, int x. And in the body of this print method, we have console.writeLine x. This defines a method that takes one integer parameter and just displays its value. Parameters behave within the method similarly to other local variables, which means they're created upon entering the method and are destroyed upon exiting the method. Fill in the blanks to declare a method that takes one integer parameter and then displays the value divided by 2. So we have void myfunc. We're needing an integer parameter, so we are going to use int there, so that we make sure we know that the parameter x is of an integer data type. Then in the body of this, we have int result equals x divided by 2. And then the last line, console.writeLine, we want to put in the variable result, because the value of x divided by 2 is going to go into the variable called result, so we can just refer to the answer or the value of x divided by 2 by referring to result. Parameters. Now you can call the method in main and pass in the value for its parameters, which are also called arguments. When we create the method, whatever goes in the parentheses when we create the method, those are called its parameters. When we call the method, what goes in the parentheses are at that point called arguments. Okay, let's go over the print method. Static void print, and in parentheses int x, that's the single parameter. And in the body of the print method, we have console.writeLine, and in parentheses x. So whatever the value of x is going to be output to the console. Now, let's call this method inside of the main method. So static void main string args. In the body of that, we have print, because the name of the method that we created above is print. And now we're going to put an argument in the parentheses here that is going to replace the int x. So we're going to put in 42. The value 42 is passed to the method as an argument and is assigned to the formal parameter x. Fill in the blanks to declare a method and call it from the main method with the argument of 88. Now again, we're creating a method. We want to be able to call it from the main method. So what do we use? Static. All right, so we have static void func, parentheses, our parameter is int x, and in the body of that method, we have console.writeLine x divided by 2. Now we're going to find our main method. So we have static void main string args. We're going to call the method above, which is func, and instead of int x, which is in the func method, we are going to call func but put in our argument to that parameter. So instead of int x, we're going to put in 88. And that's correct. You can pass different arguments to the same method as long as they are of the expected type. Again, with our static void func int x, console.writeLine x times 2, our parameter is int x. So when you call func and you put an argument in the parentheses, it has to be of an integer value. So you can call this func method over and over and over again as long as you put an integer in the parentheses. It'll work. So in our main method, static void main string args, in the body of that main method, we're calling func 3 times. Func parentheses 5 is going to output 10 because x times 2, or 5 times 2 is 10. We're going to call it again. Func with 12 as the argument this time, and 12 times 2 is 24, so that's going to output 24. And finally, we call func one more time, func, and we're using 42 as an argument, and that is going to give us the output of 84. How many times could you call a method with different arguments? As many as you want. All right, let's go and look at multiple parameters here. You can have as many parameters as needed for a method by separating them with commas in the definition. Let's create a simple method that returns the sum of 2 parameters. Int sum, and in the parentheses, int x, comma, int y. And in the body of this sum method, we are going to use the return keyword because we're going to return a value of the expression x plus y. So the sum method takes 2 integers and returns their sum. This is why the return type of the method is int. Data type and name should be defined for each parameter. Methods return values using the return statement. Fill in the missing parts of the following code to define a method that returns an int value and has 2 parameters. So it's going to return an int value, so we want to create the method as an int method. So we have int test, and then in the parentheses we have int a and int b, but we must separate those 2 parameters with a comma. Then we have the curly braces, which is the body of the test method, and we don't have any statements, we just have a comment that says some code. And that's correct. All right, multiple parameters, a little more. A method call with multiple parameters must separate arguments with commas as well. For example, a call to the sum method requires 2 arguments. So let's look in the main method where we're going to call the sum method. So we have static void main string args. This is our main method, and in the body of the main method, we're using console.writeLine, and in the parentheses, we're going to call sum. We're going to call the sum method, and in the parentheses for the sum method, we have 2 arguments. 8 that is going to replace the int x, a comma, and 6 that's going to replace the parameter int y, I think it was. And since we're adding x and y, and here we're replacing x and y with the arguments 8 and 6, the output's going to be 14. In the call above, the return value was displayed to the console window. Alternatively, we can assign the return value to a variable as in the code below. So this is going to do the same thing that the above code did, only we're going to use a variable, and then when we do the console write line, we're going to put the variable in the parentheses instead of calling the method in the parentheses. So here, again, we're looking at the main method where we're going to call the other method. Static void main string args, and in the body of the main, we have int res, short for result, equals sum. Now we're calling the sum method, and we're putting the arguments in the parentheses here, 11, 42. So on the right-hand side of the equal symbol, we're calling the method, and then on the left-hand side of the equal symbol, we're setting the value of running that method, and we're sticking it in that variable called res, short for result. And we're creating that variable with int in front of it because we want to know and we want to identify that this variable is going to hold an int value. Okay, so int res equals sum 1142, and then the last line is console.writeLine, and in parentheses the variable that we just created, res. That's going to output 53 because 11 and 42 is replacing the x and y, and in this sum method we are adding those two variables together. You can add as many parameters to a single method as you want. If you have multiple parameters, remember to separate them with commas, both when you're declaring them and when you're calling them. Fill in the blanks to declare a method which returns the largest value of its parameters. So here we've got a new method. It's going to return an integer, so we'll start off with int. The name of this method is going to be max, and the two parameters that max is going to deal with is int a and int b. Again, we must separate those two parameters with a comma. And in the body of the max method, we're doing an if condition here. If something in the parentheses is true, then we're going to do something, the next line. If something in the parentheses is not true, we're going to skip the next line. We're going to jump all the way to the else keyword, and we're going to follow the statement after the else. So what this is asking us is if A is greater than B, we are going to return A. And I didn't spell that right. Okay, and if A greater than B is a false statement, we're going to ignore return A. We're going to jump down to the else statement, and we're going to return B. B. Okay, so we went over multiple parameters. Let's look at optional and named arguments. Optional arguments. When defining a method, when you're first creating the method, you can specify a default value for optional parameters. Note that optional parameters must be defined after required parameters. If corresponding arguments are missing when the method is called, the method uses the default values. To do this, assign values to the parameters in the method definition as shown in this example. So here, let's look at a method definition. Static. We're using the keyword static because we want to be able to call this method from inside of the body of the main method. We are using the int keyword because the result that we get is going to be an integer value. We're giving it the shortcut name pow, short for power, and in the parentheses we are creating two parameters. Int x is a required parameter, and then we have a comma, and int y equals 2. What this means is when the pow method is called, we have to put a value in the calling parentheses for x because it has no value, and a comma, and some type of value for y if we want. If we don't put in a value for y, it will automatically set the value of y to 2. All right, so let's go inside of the body of this pow method. We use the first statement, which is int result equals 1. So we're creating a variable. It's an integer, and we're giving that variable name result a initial value of 1. The next thing we have is a for loop. And in this for loop, we are going to take the value of result. Result is going to be equal to result times x. So depending on what the user types in for x, you're going to end up with a completely different result from this for loop. Going back to the for loop, for, and then in parentheses, int I equals 0. So we're going to create I as kind of a counter here. And then as long as, here's the condition, as long as I is less than y, and depending on if the user puts a value in for y, it'll be as long as I is less than whatever that is. If the user doesn't put a value in for y, then it will be as long as I is less than 2, because y is given a default value of 2. And finally, we have I++, which means after we run result times equals x for the first iteration of the loop, we're going to take that I equals 0 and we're going to bump it up by 1. So at that point, I is going to equal 1. Then we're going to go back up here. We're going to run the result equals result times x once, and then we're going to go back up to the 4 and ask the condition is 1 less than y, and if that's true, then we're going to do result times equals x again, go increment I up again, so it's going to go from 0 to 1 and 1 to 2. Go back up and ask the question, is 2 less than y, which the default is 2. So if it's no larger than 2, and it's nothing different than 2, then when it asks is 2 less than 2, well, that is an incorrect statement, so it will not jump into the for loop body and do result times equals x again. It won't. So then whatever the very last value of result was, depending on how many iterations of this loop that you have to do, whatever that last value is, when we jump out of the loop, return result is going to let this method save that result, save the value of that result, and it will return it to the calling. When we call the method, it'll return it. The POW method assigns a default value of 2 to the y parameter. If we call the method without passing the value for the y parameter, the default value will be used, which I already explained, and that's 2. So here in the main, we're going to call the POW method. Static void main string args, console.writeLine, we're going to call POW, and in this particular call, in this method call, they gave a value for x, which is 6. They did not give a value for y, so the default y value of 2 will be used for this particular method call. And for this particular method call, we end up using the power of 2, which is the default y value, and so therefore 6 to the power of 2 is 36. Now the next line is going to call the POW method again, but it's going to give it different arguments. So console.writeLine, POW, this time they gave 3 to replace x and 4 to replace y. So what this is 3 to the power of 4. 3 times 3 is 9. That's 3 to the power of 2. 9 times 3 is 27, so that's 3 to the power of 3. 27 times 3 is 81, so that's 3 to the power of 4. And that's why you see the comment that says output's 81. As you can see, the default parameter values can be used for calling the same method in different situations without requiring arguments for every parameter. Just remember that you must have the parameters with default values at the end of the parameter list when defining the method. What is the output of this code? Static int vol, and the parameters for this method are int x, int y equals 3, int z equals 1. So you see that y and z have defaults if the user doesn't put an argument in for them. In the body of this method vol, we have the statement return x times y times z. Okay, so we're done with the method vol. Now let's call vol inside of main. Static void main string args, and in the body of the main method we have console.writeLine, and in the parentheses we're calling vol, and in the parentheses for the vol we are replacing x with a 2, and after the comma we are replacing a y with a 4. We do not have a third value, so we are not setting anything for the third parameter, which means that the default 1 for z will be used. So in this case, 2 times 4 is 8, times 1 is 8. So our value should be 8. It should output 8, and it does. Named arguments. Named arguments free you from the need to remember the order of the parameters in a method call. Each argument can be specified by the matching parameter name. For example, the following method calculates the area of a rectangle by its height and width. Static, because we want to be able to call this from the main method. Int, because we want to return an integer value. Area is the name of the method because it tells us basically what it's going to do. It's going to find the area of something. And in parentheses, we have two parameters, int h, short for height, comma, int w, short for width. And in the body of this area method, we have return h times w. So therefore, when calling the method, you can use the parameter names to provide the arguments in any order you like. So instead of memorizing that the height value has to be put first and the width value has to be put second, this is how we're going to do it in any order we want by directly using the name of the parameter. Static void main string args. Inside the body of the main, we have int res equals area, and in parentheses we have w, colon 5, comma h colon 8. So on the right hand side of the equal sign, we're calling the method area, and we are setting the values for width and height, and whatever the answer is for running that method is going to go into the variable called res, short for result. Then when we do our console.writeLine, in parentheses, we put the variable res, and that output will be 40. Now in this particular method, it doesn't matter if you say 5 times 8 or 8 times 5. No matter what order you do it, it's still going to be 40. But there's going to be a lot of other expressions where it's going to make a big difference, the order that you put certain values in. So doing it this way, calling a method using method names here, parameter names, as arguments, is a very good idea. Named arguments use the name of the parameter followed by a colon and the value. Call the method using named arguments with the values 5 for from, 99 for to, and 2 for step. So let's look at the method first, and then we'll get to the main and show you how we call it. Static, because we want to open it up, we want to turn it on, open it up, call it from main. Got to use the static keyword. We got to use the int keyword because we're going to return an integer value. We're giving this method a name calc because we're basically doing a calculation. And the parameters, we've got 3 parameters. And we have int from, comma, int to, comma, int step equals 1. So in the body of the calc method, we start off with int res equals 0. So we're using res short for result, and we're setting it initially to 0. Then we've got a for loop for int I equals from. As long as I is less than 2, I plus equals step. And in the body of the for loop, what we're going to do, each iteration of the for loop, we're going to take the value of res, and we are going to, res is going to be equal to res plus I. So the short form of res equals res plus I equals res plus equals I. And when we're finished looping, the very last value that we achieved, that we set for res, is going to be returned by the return keyword and then the name of the variable res. All right, so now that we've discussed the calc method, let's discuss how you call that calc method from inside the main method. Static void main string args, and in the body of the main method, you say int res equals. Okay, so we're going to call the calc function, calc, and we are going to use the named parameters here. So we're going to use the names of the parameters to name the arguments. So look in the instructions at the top. What value was 2 for? you see, we had value 5 for from, 99 for to, and 2 for step. We are going to use the name step. We are going to use the colon, and after the colon is our 2. For some reason, this is not letting me put my colon in. Very strange. It should be step colon 2, and this seems to be locking up. Come on now. Step colon. This is awful. From colon 5 to colon 99 and step. This is driving me nuts. It's not letting me. It is not letting me do step colon 2. Oh, because, wait. S-T-E-P colon. All right, I guess what happened was every time I misspelled step by hitting the wrong key, and then I hit the auto spell check, and it would spell check my step correctly, it would not allow me to put the colon in afterwards. I had to make sure that I physically clicked on S, clicked on T, clicked on E, clicked on P, then I could click on colon. Using the auto spell check was not allowing me to put the colon in. Needless to say, this should be done. So again, we're in the main method and we want to call the calc method inside of it. On the right-hand side of the equal sign, we want to call that calc method. We want to use the parameter names from the calc method above, and with a colon, set those different names to values in any order we want. So we have step colon 2, comma 2 colon 99, comma from colon 5. And then we want console.write. Oh, I'm sorry. I did the calc on the right-hand side of the equals, and on the left-hand side of the equals, I set the result of that to a variable called res, which is short for result. And on the last line, I did console.write line, and in parentheses, I put in the value. I put in the variable res. Okay. Wow, that took forever to go over. All right, so we did optional and named arguments. Let's do passing arguments now. There are 3 ways to pass arguments to a method when the method is called. By value, which is basically what we've been doing so far, by reference, and as output. By value copies the argument's value into the method's formal parameter. So when we first create the method, the formal parameter might have been int x. When we called the method inside of the main, whatever number we gave for int x was basically being copied right into int x. So if we gave the argument 8 when we called the method, then int x would have a value of 8. Okay. Here, we can make changes to the parameter within the method without having any effect on the argument. And by default, C# uses call by value to pass arguments. So that's the default way to do it. The following examples demonstrate by value. So I'm going to go over a method, then I'm going to go over how we call the method inside of the main method. Static, because we're going to have it called inside a main. Void, because we're not returning a value. SQR, short for square, and one single parameter, int x. In the body of the square method, we have x equals x times x. Now we're looking at the main method, static void main, and in the body of our main method, we have int a equals 3, and then we're going to call our square method with its name, SQR, and in parentheses, we have the variable a. So a is created in main, and then it's called let's see. In main, we're creating a variable called a, and we're setting it to a value of 3. We are calling square, and we're putting a in to replace int x. Then when we use console.writeLine a, we end up with an output of 3 because in the main method we created a and we gave it the value of 3. So we didn't want to confuse ourselves and think that it would be 3 times 3, which would be 9. So in this case, x is the parameter of this SQR method, and a is the actual argument passed into the method. As you can see, the square method does not change the original value of the variable as it is passed by value, meaning that it operates on the value, not the actual variable. What is the output of this code? The first method is static because we want to call it in our main method, void because we're not returning a value, test, which is the name of the method that we're creating, and the method test has one parameter, int x. In the body of the test method, we have x equals 8. Next, we're going to look at the main method, static void main, and in the body of the main method, we create a as an integer and we set it to 5. Int a equals 5. Then we call our test method and we give a as the argument. Then we have console.writeLine and we put a in the parentheses after WriteLine. I think the value of a is going to be 5. Reason I think that is because a was created in main, and by putting a as an argument to the test method, because the test method does not return anything, a should not change. So if I'm understanding this correctly, let's see if a is going to be 5. Let's see if that's right. And it is. Okay, so now we're going to go over passing by reference. Pass by reference copies an argument's memory address into the formal parameter. Inside the method, the address is used to access the actual argument used in the call. This means that changes made to the parameter affect the argument. To pass the value by reference, the ref keyword is used in both the call and the method definition. So now let's look at the square method a little differently. Static, again, because we want to call it from inside the main method. Void, because we are not going to return a value. SQR is the name of the method. This time, however, in the parentheses, instead of just having int x, we are having ref int x. And in the body of this square method, we have the same thing as we had before, x equals x times x. Now let's look at the main method, which we are going to call the square method from inside of. Static void main, int a equals 3. Now when we call square, SQR, and use a as an argument, but prefacing it with ref a, now when we do our console.writeLine, parentheses a, now we're going to get 9, because now we are actually letting the method change the argument. The ref keyword passes the memory address to the method parameter, which allows the method to operate on the actual variable. The ref keyword is used both when defining the method and when calling it. Fill in the blanks to create a method that swaps the values of its two arguments. Okay, so now we have void swap. I'm going to say ref int x, comma, ref int y. Then in the swap method's body, I have int temp. Temp is equal to x. X is equal to y. And y is equal to temp. Passing by output. Output parameters are similar to reference parameters, except that they transfer data out of the method rather than accept data in. They are defined using the out keyword. The variable supplied for the output parameter need not be initialized, since that value will not be used. Output parameters are particularly useful when you need to return multiple values from a method. For example, let's look at the method first, the outer method. Static, because we want to call it from inside of the other method main. Void, because we are not returning a value. Get values is the name of the method. And the parameters in the parentheses are out int x, comma, out int y. And in the body of this get values method, we have x equals 5 and y equals 42. Let's check out how we call this from our main method, static void main string args. Here we create two variables, int a, comma, b. So we're creating integers a and b. We are calling the method getValues, and in parentheses we put the arguments out a, comma, out b. Now a equals 5 because it's replacing x, and b equals 42 because it's replacing y. Unlike the previous reference type example, where the value 3 was referred to the method, which changed its value to 9, output parameters get their value from the method, 5 and 42 in the above example. Similar to the ref keyword, the out keyword is used both when defining the method and when calling it. Fill in the blanks to ask for user input in the method and return the value entered using output parameters. Okay, so here's the method. Static because we want to call it from inside of the main method. Void because it is not going to return a value. Ask is the name of the method. And then in the parentheses, because we are dealing with output parameters, we are going to use the keyword out. And here we're using the data type string because we're dealing with a name. So someone's going to type in letters, not numbers. And in the body of the ask method, we are going to we are going to ask for a hint. Okay, that's my hint. The parameter is name, so I'm going to take console.readLine on the right-hand side of the equals. That's going to take whatever the user types in and put it into the variable name. And we created the variable name as a parameter of this method ask. All right, so then we're going to call this ask from the main method. So static void main string args. Inside of the body of that main method, we are creating string nm. So this is a new variable that we're creating of a string data type. We're calling the ask method, and then we are going to use the out keyword and then put in the variable nm, short for name. Okay, so we did the optional named arguments, passing arguments, we already did that one. And let's go over method overloading. Method overloading is when multiple methods have the same name, but different parameters. For example, you might have a print method that outputs its parameter to the console window like this: void print, and in parentheses int a. And in the body of this print method, we have console.writeLine value plus a. The plus operator is used to concatenate values. In this case, the value of a is joined to the text value. This method accepts an integer argument only. Overloading it will make it available for other types such as double. So here we're going to do another print method, but instead of giving it int a as the parameter, we're going to give it double a as the parameter. So now we can use a decimal value. So void print, and in parentheses the parameter double a, and it has the same exact statement in the body as the other one did. Console.writeLine parentheses the string value plus a. Now the same print method name will work for both integers and doubles. Method overloading means it's the same method name, but it has different parameters. When overloading methods, the definitions of the methods must differ from each other by the types and/or number of parameters. When there are overloaded methods, the method called is based on the arguments. An integer argument will call the method implementation that accepts an integer parameter. A double argument will call the implementation that accepts a double parameter. Multiple arguments will call the implementation that accepts the same number of arguments. So here are some examples. We're going to look at 3 methods with the name of print. They're all static because we want to be able to call every one of these different methods from the main method. They're all void because we are not returning a value. They all have the same name print, but they all have different parameters. The first one uses the parameter int a. And inside of the body of this particular print method, we have console.writeLine, the string value plus a. Looking at the second method, static void print, in parentheses, we have the parameter double a. And in the body of this method, we have console.writeLine, the string value plus a, exactly the same as the previous. Only this time, if the user types in a decimal, 12.57, it's going to point to this particular method. Lastly, we have static void print, and in parentheses, we have string label, comma, double a. So now we have 2 parameters to deal with. And in the body of that print method, we have console.writeLine, in parentheses label plus a. Now we're going to look at the main method and see how we call all these different print methods. So string void main string args, static void main string args, and in the body of the main method we call print, and we give it the argument of 11. That's going to point to the first print because it's giving you an integer. Then we're going to call print, and we're going to give it the argument 4.13. That's going to call the middle print because it's got a parameter of double. And lastly, we have print. We're calling print again, and in parentheses we have two arguments. One is a string, comma, and the second is a double value. And so that matches the string label and double A parameters of the third print method. So it's going to call that one and do whatever the body is for that one. You cannot overload method declarations that differ only by return type. So the following declaration results in an error. Here we have int print name, parentheses, int A, and then whatever is put in the body. Next we have float print name. You have the same data type here. The parameter is B, but it's int B. And then you have double print name, and it's got int C. So all three of them have a single parameter, and all three of them are integers. So just because you prefaced print name with int, float, or double, it's still going to give you an error because the parameters have to be different. What is the output of this code? Static void print with parameter int A, and the body is console.writeLine A times A. And then there's another print, static void print with a parameter of double A. And in the body of this method, we have console.writeLine A plus A. So one is doing multiplication, the other is adding. Then we are going to call one of those methods inside of the main. We have static void main string args. We are going to call print, and inside of the parentheses, we are going to put the argument 3. Well, 3 is an integer, so it's going to call the first print method. And what happens inside of the body of that first print method? It console.writeLine parentheses A times A. So 3 is going to represent A, and 3 times 3 is 9. So since it's going to use that method, we're going to get that answer. Okay, passing arguments, method overloading. We already did method overloading. Let's look at recursion. A recursive method is a method that calls itself. One of the classic tasks that can be solved easily by recursion is calculating the factorial of a number. In mathematics, the term factorial refers to the product of all positive integers that are less than or equal to a specific non-negative integer. The factorial of n is denoted as n exclamation point. For example, 4 exclamation point equals 4 times 3 times 2 times 1 equals 24. What is the factorial of 5? The factorial of 5 would be 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. 5 times 4 is 20. 4 times 3 is 120. 120 times 2 is 240. 240 times 1 is 240. And I must have did something wrong. Let me look backwards. What did I do wrong? 5 times 4 is 20. 20 times 3. Oh, I'm sorry. I did my math wrong. 5 times 4 is 20. 20 times 3 is 60. 60 times 2 is 120, and 120 times 1 is 120. So I just screwed up mathematically. I didn't have a little notepad to write it out. So there. Okay, that was dumb. As you can see, a factorial can be thought of as repeatedly calculating num times num minus 1 until you reach 1. Based on this solution, let's define our method. So we're going to create a nice method that's going to do this for us. Static, because we want to be able to call this in the main method. Int, because we're going to return an integer. Fact, because we want to name this short for factorial. And then in the parentheses, we have a single int num. And inside of the body of this method fact, we have if num is equal to 1. If that's true, then we will return 1. After that condition, we have the statement return num times, now we're calling fact again, but this time in parentheses, we're changing the argument to num minus 1. In the fact recursive method, the if statement defines the exit condition, a base case that requires no recursion. In this case, when num equals 1, the solution is simply to return 1. The factorial of 1 is 1. The recursive call is placed after the exit condition and returns num multiplied by the factorial of n minus 1. For example, if you call the fact method with the argument 4, it will execute as follows. Return 4 times fact parentheses 3, which is 4 times 3 times fact 2, which is 4 times 3 times 2 times fact 1, which is 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. Now we can call our fact method from main. Static void main string args. And in the body of the main, we have console.writeLine fact 6. So what that's going to do is that's going to be 6 times 5, which is 30. 30 times 4 is 120. 120 times 3 is 360. I should do this with a calculator. Anyway, it basically tells us right in front of me that the output is 720. But if you want to check that, then get a calculator and do 6 times 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1, and that should give you 720. The factorial method calls itself and then continues to do so until the argument equals 1. The exit condition prevents the method from calling itself indefinitely. What prevents the recursive method to call itself forever? The exit condition. It's just like a for loop. If you don't have an exit condition to stop it from looping, it keeps on looping forever. Same thing with this recursive method. You need an exit so it doesn't keep going on forever. All right, making of a pyramid. Now let's create a method that will display a pyramid of any height to the console window using star symbols. Based on this description, a parameter will be defined to reflect the number of rows for the pyramid. So let's start by declaring the method. Static, because we want to call this in main. Void, because we are not returning a value. Draw a pyramid, because that's what we want our method to do. And then we have a single parameter, int n, in the parentheses. And then in the body of this draw pyramid method, we just have a comment that says some code will go here. Draw a pyramid does not need to return a value and takes an integer parameter n. In programming, the step-by-step logic required for the solution to a problem is called an algorithm. The algorithm for make pyramid is this. Number 1, the first row should contain 1 star at the top center of the pyramid. The center is calculated based on the number of rows in the pyramid. Number 2, each row after the first should contain an odd number of stars. 1, 3, 5, etc. until the number of rows is reached. Based on the algorithm, the code will use for loops to display spaces and stars for each row. So here we have static, again, because we want to be able to open this in the main method, void, because we are not returning a value, draw pyramid, because that's what we want to do. The name of the method has to make sense with what you want to do with it. The parameter is int n. And now we have a for loop. Int I equals 1, as long as I is less than or equal to n, I++. Then we have a nested for loop inside of that one. For int j equals I, as long as j is less than or equal to n, j++. That internal for loop is going to have a console.write space, and a space is created by using the string double quote symbols and just putting a space in between. Then we have another for loop for int k equals 1, as long as k is less than or equal to 2 times I minus 1, then k++. The for loop body for that one is console.write, and in parentheses we have an asterisk in double quotes plus a space in double quotes. Okay, so then we have console.writeLine, which should belong to the second for loop. Then you close up both sets of curly braces. The first loop that iterates through each row of the pyramid contains 2 for loops. The first inner loop displays the spaces needed before the first star symbol. The second inner loop displays the required number of stars for each row, which is calculated based on the formula 2 times I minus 1, where I is the current row. The final console.writeLine statement moves the cursor to the next row. Now if we call the drawPyramid method, it will display a pyramid having the number of rows we have passed to the method. How many loops can you nest within each other? I'm going to go with any. Okay, so now that we've discussed the recursion and making of a pyramid, let's go for the Module 3 quiz. What is the output of this code? Static int test, and in our parentheses, out int x, int y equals 4. In the body of the test method, we have x equal to 6 and return x times y. Okay, then we have the main method, which inside of this we're going to call the test method. So the main method starts out static void main string args, and inside of the body of the main method we have int a, so we're creating a. Then we're creating int z, and we're setting that equal to test, and in parentheses we have the argument out a. Then the last line we have is console.writeLine a plus z. I'm still a little fuzzy with this out and ref, but I'm going to see if I can get close. All right, when I call test and I have the argument out a, when I look above at my method test, I see I also have out int x. So what I'm going to think when I look at the original test method, x is set equal to 6. Okay, so I am going to think that a is also going to be equal to 6. Okay. The return for the test method is taking x and multiplying it to y. When you do the original 6 times x times y, you're doing 6 times 4 because y has a default value of 4. Okay, so I think when I run test, a is going to be replaced with 6. 6 times 4 is 24. So the result of test out A, which is going to go into the variable z, should be 24. Okay, so now z should be 24. Then when we get to console.writeLine, A plus z, z is going to be 24. What is A going to be? Well, if I backtrack, because A was an argument that went out to the test method, and the value of A was 6, because it's in the place of the x variable in the original test method, I'm going to think that A is going to be equal to 6, and Z is going to be equal to 24, so 6 plus 24 is 30. So I'm going to guess that my final console.writeLine A plus Z is going to be a value of 30. I hope I'm right. I was right. Okay. Okay, so that took us, I guess, to the end of the methods, and the next thing is going to be about classes and objects, but I'm going to do that in the next video because this video has already been an hour and 6 minutes.